Path of Exile 2 isn't a particularly taxing game, but low or mid-range PCs can struggle to maintain consistent frame rates, especially during combat encounters. In this one, I'll go to the different graphics settings, explaining how they impact the visual quality and performance of the game. At the end, I'll configure an optimized quality preset for the GeForce RTX 4060, which is the most popular Steam GPU at the moment. We have the X11, the X12, and Vulkan. Now, the X11 is depreciated, so we'll only look at Vulkan and the X12. Here's the CPU frame time and the GPU frame time. Now, before just frame is rendered, the CPU prepares the frame data and then sends it to the GPU for the actual rendering. Ideally, you want your CPU to be faster, with lower CPU frame times than the GPU frame times. So the GPU just doesn't sit there waiting for the frame data and doing nothing, which results in a CPU bottleneck. Exile 2 running at 4K Ultra on the GeForce RTX 4090 and Ryzen 9 7950X. Now, since this is native 4K Ultra, it's a predominantly GPU-bound workload. And as you can see, DX12 has a slight advantage over Vulkan. Slightly lower frame times, which results in a 4 to 5% lead, which is usually what we see in games that are GPU bound. Here we have a CPU bound scenario. We've reduced the upscaling to ultra performance, which reduces the GPU workload, allowing the CPU to catch up and bottleneck the workload. So this is similar to having a higher end GPU like a 4090, 4080, and a lower end or older CPU like the 10600K, 12600K, or Ryzen 5 3600. As you can see, Vulkan performs much better with much smoother frame pacing, and compared to DX12, DX12 often runs into a CPU bottleneck where the CPU frame times are much higher, making the GPU just sit there idly by, leading to a CPU bottleneck. Comparatively, Vulkan doesn't see much of that. The GPU still keeps up with the CPU, and you see a much smoother overall performance. You can choose between direct lighting, which is just shadows, or you can add global illumination as well, which adds indirect or diffuse lighting. Global illumination or diffuse lighting drastically improves the visual fidelity of the scene. It results in a much more thorough illumination of different surfaces, while also making the shadows softer and more realistic. You can see the floor, the walls, and other objects that don't have a direct line of sight with the light source are much more uniformly illuminated. Here, 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 while casting softer, more realistic shadows. Path of Exile uses global illumination for natural light sources like the sun and the moon, as well as artificial sources like this torch here. The latter has a much more substantial impact on lighting, producing light bleeding, deeper shadows, and heightened illumination. Here, it's most prominent in these areas. Interestingly, while global illumination affects the spells like this firewall spell here, the spell only illuminates the surrounding surfaces with the light bleeding effect without casting any shadows. A ray of light from a bulb or the sun or any other light source directly hitting a surface or an object without any obstructions will brightly illuminate the surface, often resulting in a sharp, well-defined shadow. This is known as direct lighting. If this ray of light now gets reflected and hits another object like this ball here, it will illuminate it to a lesser degree, resulting in blurrier, less defined shadows with soft boundaries. This is known as diffuse lighting. Performance-wise, high-quality GI is 15 to 20% faster than Ultra, which is quite significant. So essentially, for slightly lower quality foliage shadows and finer geometric shadows, you're getting 20% more performance. Reducing the shadow plus GI quality to low further downgrades the quality of ambient shadows. As you can see here at low, ambient shadows cast by the foliage and tombstones are almost completely eliminated at low. Furthermore, light doesn't travel as farther at low. As far as performance is concerned, low quality shadow GI is only 5 to 6% faster than high, while losing much of the shadow fidelity. So I'd say high is definitely the sweet spot here. You retain most of the shadows. The light fidelity is nearly almost as good as Ultra, and you're 15 to 20% faster by setting lighting to shadows only. This has a prominent impact on the visual fidelity, lighting, and the tone of the game. Most of the finer shadows disappear, like the ones surrounding the vegetation, foliage, and these finer architectural geometry. Furthermore, spells like this light wall no longer illuminates its surroundings or has any impact on the lighting of the game. The color bleeding effect also disappears. Global illumination comes with massive performance implications. Disabling it grants a 30 to 35% improvement versus GI Ultra, a 10 to 12% gain over GI High, and a much more tamer 5% compared to GI Low. However, considering the substantial visual impact, I'd recommend sticking to GI Low over completely disabling it. Even if you're struggling for performance, that 5% hit is definitely worth it. Lighting alone without global illumination, then shadow quality only adjusts the resolution of shadows caused by artificial light sources. This includes torches, campfires, these portals, waypoints, and other point sources of light. So Ultra and High mainly differ with respect to the shadow map resolution. High renders slightly less detailed, blurrier shadow maps with less defined edges. There's a 4% performance difference between Ultra and High. Low falls back to simplified shadow maps that skip complex geometry, like these twigs, foliage, and other micro geometry. Low and high perform about the same, so I don't think you want to go to low. Just stick to high, or better yet, just stick to GI plus shadows low. Now we have sun shadow quality. This only impacts the shadow quality when the shadows are cast by the sunlight, the moonlight, or the top-down global light. doesn't impact shadows caused by torches, fires, or any other artificial sources. It has a pretty subtle impact on the performance and quality. The shadows are slightly, ever so slightly blurrier with relatively less defined edges. It's not really noticeable. And performance-wise, you gain like 1 or 2 more, like 0.5% more frame rates at high compared to low. Really, but just go either way doesn't really make much of a difference. With lights, it's another setting that affects the intensity of spell-based lighting. Now, despite what the game says, low doesn't disable spell lights. You still have spell lights at low if you have global illumination enabled. Now, it can have a 4 to 6% performance impact at high compared to low. It generally makes the lights brighter. I guess it's like increases the number of pixel lights at high. With fewer or no light spells on screen, it has a negligible performance impact. This pillar, it's brighter at high. Yeah, so it just makes the spell lights brighter and more intense. Can be up to 6 to 7% with a lot of spell lights on screen. Water detail level, this mainly sets the resolution of water textures. They become a tad blurrier at low compared to high, and performance-wise, you gain like a frame or two. It's not noticeable, you won't even know. So you can go either way, doesn't matter. Mainly for GPU bound scenarios, when you're running at 100 FPS or higher, you might feel like there's an input latency, like your actions take longer on the screen. If something like that happens, it's best to enable it. On plus boost makes sure that your GPU is always running at the highest boost clocks to minimize the GPU bottleneck. I'm sorry, the CPU bottleneck. If you're GPU bound, then on plus boost doesn't make sense. If you're CPU bound, on plus boost makes sure the GPU is running at its highest clocks in an attempt to minimize the CPU bottleneck. Is dynamic culling. This disables or substantially reduces the particle density. Particles like ember, soot, dust particles, and like, here's how it works. On the right side, we have dynamic culling enabled. On the left side, it's disabled. Now, as you can see, with dynamic culling, there are very few embers, these fire embers. There are very few embers surrounding the character as she casts the spell. Without culling, the density is much higher, both around the character and the flames. Now, this is mainly applicable when you see frame rate drops during combat, when you're casting a lot of spells and these particle effects are going around here and there. So if you're facing drops during combat or in casting spells, you enable this and you'll just get fewer particle effects. On most higher end and mid-range GPUs, this won't really have a notable performance impact. Perhaps if you're on an older CPU, like a really old CPU or a quad-core CPU, then maybe it might be helpful. texture quality and filtering for the end because these don't really have much of an impact. Texture quality is should be set to high as long as you have an 8 GB GPU at 4K high native. This game is like 10 to 12 GB. At 1440p, it's more like 9, 8 to 9. And 1080p mostly just remains at around 8. So if you have a 6 GB graphics card, you should probably set it to medium or just set it to high and enable upscaling. If you have a 4 GB card, then definitely set it to medium. There's texture filtering. This is usually used in first-person and third-person games to smoothen out textures that are sort of, directly perpendicular to the screen, like textures that are perpendicular to your line of sight. Here, it doesn't make much of a difference because these are directly facing the screen, so there's a minimal impact. This is a good example. These textures are directly facing your line of sight and are sort of trapezoidal. In this case, this can lead to oversampling and undersampling of the texture maps, and stroke filtering fixes that. Here we have Path of Exile running on a 4060 laptop with a Core i7 13th Gen CPU. Now, running it at 1440p Ultra, balanced upscaling is enough to get you to 60 FPS on average. However, during combat encounters, and there are a lot of enemies on screen and a lot of particles and spells, the frame rate drops to 45 to 50, as you can see now. Yeah, 45, 46. 80p on a 4060 laptop, then quality mode upscaling should be enough to keep you well above 60 FPS. However, at 1440p and 1600p, you'll need to lower shadow and GI quality to high. So 55 to 60 FPS was the lowest. If you're still seeing drops in intense combat encounters, I suggest enabling dynamic culling. For RTX 3060 users, you'll also need performance mode upscaling at 1440p. So GI plus shadow quality on high or medium, high or low, plus performance upscaling and dynamic culling at 1440p. At 1080p, balanced upscaling, high quality shadows and low illumination, and dynamic culling should be enough for a 3060 as well. And upscaling is just like a given these days. You render the game internally at a lower resolution and then use temporal upsampling to display a higher resolution while drastically reducing the performance requirements. In games like Path of Exile, you don't gain much out of this because you're GPU bound. You're not GPU bound, you're relatively CPU bound. So as you can see here, even performance mode is only like 20-25% faster than native 4K, and performance mode is running the game at like half the resolution along both axes. So that means 4K is running at 1080p. So you get like 25% more performance for half the resolution. Not really worth it. I'd recommend sticking to quality mode. It's just like 5% faster and quality mode can actually look better than native because it applies anti-aliasing and past frame data to sort of super sample the image. So you get 5 to 10% more performance and a better looking image. That is it for this one. This was our very first video. We do a lot of written content on PC optimized settings and hardware times. Be sure to visit those. So I'm sure there are a lot of rough edges in this video, a lot of monotonous speech, amateur edits, etc., etc. But we're just starting off. So yeah, we're going to try and improve over time. Hopefully you can help with that. Hit a like and subscribe, and be sure to let us know which game you want us to do next, or if there are any technical things you want us to do, like upscaling or train gen or any of that. We'll be sure to consider it. So yeah, thank you.